Hello, everybody. Welcome to part two of UA Spotlight. We're back with our guest, lawyer and author, David J. Shestokas. He has his book, Constitutional Soundbites, that we highlighted in the last program. I wish there wasn't a glare, but you can see his name there. It's Shestokas. You can find his book on Amazon, and it's probably best to buy his book and read along. It's very good. Last show we left off talking about the German Constitution and the Constitution that was disseminated, printed, and disseminated in Pennsylvania, and that before the nation or the country was even founded, that they were including these other peoples from different places and different languages. You also have a book, Constitutional Soundbites in Spanish. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I certainly can. Well, I've been studying, preparing some things, and I ran across this history that we talked about regarding the German and the Dutch editions of the Constitution that were published right at the very beginning, before there was a Constitution, before it was adopted. And I've done some Spanish studies over time. Studied a little in Costa Rica a couple times, and fortunate enough to have gone to Cuba about 10 years ago. And a little better than a year ago, I started looking around just for interest to see what was available in the Spanish language about founding principles and the founding documents. And I found actually that I couldn't find anything. I could find some translations of the documents. I found a few little Wikipedia things, something called, one Wikipedia entry that particularly set me off was something called Padres Fundadores, which is founding fathers.
Mm-hmm.
And but the second or third sentence in Spanish, it says that the Constitution of 1787 sanctioned the system of slavery. And I said,
oh boy.
I said, that's what I said to myself was, oh boy. I said, how can this possibly be? There's plenty of arguments, and eventually we'll have an opportunity to talk some details why that's not really, why that's just simply not true. But I called my my friend, Dr. Berta Arias, we went to Cuba with. Herself a Cuban immigrant, but she's also a longtime Spanish professor. And I said, Berta, I said, could I be wrong? Could there be nothing out there? And plus, what I did read with my limited Spanish skills had the wrong information. And she called me back in another day. She's a longtime educator. And she said, Dave, you're absolutely right. I said, can you help me to correct this for the 400 million Spanish speakers around the world? And so we spent the next year taking what had been 3 Kindle books. I'd done 3 little Kindle books and turning them into a collected edition and putting them in Spanish. And the result was this Constitutional Soundbites, but it's known as Cápsulas Informativas Constitucionales, which is the very first book of its kind that discusses and explains the founding documents in Spanish. And if you think back, that goes with the tradition that was started on the first day that the Constitution was made available, about the German and the Dutch. And certainly from time to time I have opportunities. In fact, in the end of June, I'm going to Orlando and speaking to the Young Latino Leadership Summit about the translation issues. And there's issues, because people can be bilingual. I'm sure that the Germans and the Dutch that lived in the States at the beginning of the country probably had English skills to get along with their neighbors and things like that. But it's a whole nother thing to get important principles and important ideas and philosophies so that you understand them, and they're best understood in the language that you have. So Dr. Arias and I spent almost a year actually going back and forth, even on particular words, to try and take 18th century English and make it accurate in 21st century Spanish.
That's got to be tough.
Well, it was both tough and it was fun, and we've had just great response from Latino media. We've been on Buenos Dias, Miami, and we've been on
Wow.
Telemundo, and we've been on this HITN, which is in 36 million Spanish-speaking homes across the country, because it's news in Spanish that nobody's ever done this before.
You're really working hard to get all this information out there, and you really should be lauded for it. I mean, it's really excellent to do that. Get it out there to people that aren't English speakers, to get it out there to people that are English speakers that don't know enough about it. As we said in the last show, it's imperative to know this stuff. I think citizens are obligated to know it. But I mean, a common criticism I would say is, why does this still matter? Why is what they said at the time still matter? Why is it still pertinent? I mean, this is 200 and however many years ago.
I can go with two words: timeless and universal. The ideas that we have inalienable rights, the ideas that we are born with them, that they're not given to us by government. Here's speaking of the Spanish communication situation, the word constitution and constitución just have completely different connotations. Definitionally, a document that sets up a government. Okay, when you get beyond that, of course, our Constitution is rife with the connotations that come out of the Declaration of Independence. Article 1 of the Constitution of the United States of Mexico states, the people of the United States of Mexico shall have the rights granted by this Constitution.
Uh-oh.
Except as hereinafter provided. So somebody that comes from that tradition, that background, that teaching from their beginning is that the government gives you rights.
That's right.
Has to. So when we say who grew up here, the word Constitution, and somebody who came up in a government that's defined the way the Mexican government is, we're off to a very, very different start.
Right.
We're off to a very, very different start.
This is why you said it too in the first program, that it's imperative to understand the philosophy that our government was instituted because we have already existing rights, and the government's purpose is to safeguard these already existing rights. Is that correct? I mean, was there a reason why the framers wanted to protect already existing rights? I mean, if we have a civil society and everybody respects these rights, what's the purpose of government?
That's exactly the purpose of government. You're restating, obviously, certain aspects of the Declaration of Independence, where Jefferson set forth those principles. And interestingly enough, Jefferson put it in terms that covers everybody, regardless of a belief system, when he said inalienable rights that come from the law of nature and nature's God. And the fact is that you don't necessarily have to believe in God to be able to observe that people want to be free. No government can outlaw the law of gravity within their territory. They can pass the law, but it won't make any difference. And just in the same way, you can observe that people want to be free. It's a matter of human nature. They don't want to be dictated to. They don't want to have their lives defined by somebody else. It doesn't matter. They can pass all the laws they want that says you have to buy health insurance. Doesn't matter. Right. Doesn't mean you want to buy health insurance.
So to put it simply, nature created my eyes to see. Government tomorrow can't create a dictate that says, well, you're going to use your eyes to smell tomorrow, but in a certain way.
That's exactly right. And Jefferson covered that. Jefferson covered that with those 6 simple words: the law of nature, or of nature's God. And so when people get tied up with some sort of religious overtones, Jefferson wrote it for everybody, regardless of what they believe. It can be scientific as well. So those are the kind of things that it doesn't come out necessarily. It has to come out the same. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness has to come out as la vida, la libertad y búsqueda de felicidad. So that's real important. At any rate, that I was inspired by those guys in '87, and then I found out that the information was wrong. And now let's talk a little bit about the guys.
All right.
Because while the book itself is short on a lot of biography, it's important to remember that for every word that you find in the Constitution, there's a backstory. Something happened, either in history or over time or during the colonial period, that wound up being a provision in the
I
Constitution.
mean, they derived this stuff from experience. All knowledge didn't happen the day they signed the Constitution.
No, and that's something we're going to get into probably in another in maybe 2 shows,
Okay.
because we're going very fast. But you're right. No, they one of the things. But the first guy let's talk about the father of the country. Let's talk about the very first guy, George Washington. Why he's called the father of the country, and why he's such a great example in many respects. Of course, the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army that won the war, ultimately retired. And this is an interesting thing. He started setting the tone right at the end of the war. The Peace Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783. Shortly thereafter, George Washington took his sword and surrendered it to Congress. King George III over in England, when he heard about that, said, "This probably is the greatest man that has ever lived." Because in those days and through history, what happened when a general won a great victory?
He was the king, right?
Yeah, he was the king. He was the king. And everybody not everybody, but there was a lot of people. Of course, they had a tradition of living under royalty and having royalty. These days, we still think Prince William is wonderful.
Was there any conception of a president at that time? Was there any? I mean, most of the history has been sovereign leaders, kings, monarchs at that time. Was there any conception of a president with limited powers, prior?
No.
Okay.
Very simple. Very simple answer. Certainly there's some history of some evolution of the relationship between the king and parliament, but there never was the position like ultimately got created for Washington. We'll talk about that eventually too. But so Washington surrenders his sword in 1783, goes back to becoming a farmer.
Wow.
And he had to be talked into and goaded and cajoled in 1787 to come back and preside over the Constitutional Convention. Constitutional Convention was over. He went back home. He went back to Virginia. And then after the Constitutional Convention, after the Constitution was ratified, he obviously was unanimously elected as the very first president. And I think the idea and the concept of this belief that we should have something like a citizen legislature or citizen officers of the government that go and serve and then leave, because of course in 1797, after 2 terms as president, at a time when there was no restriction on him being reelected, he went back home to Virginia.
Perfect guy to be the first president, if you ask me.
Yeah, he set that tone, and it was very, very important to him to consider the idea, because he certainly could have established some sort of royalty at that particular.
Is this why the other important founders and framers wanted him to be the president of everything? Is that because they understood that here's a guy that after he won the Revolutionary War, he turns in his sword to the Continental Congress, that this guy was here's the guy that didn't want power the most, was the perfect guy to give the power to?
That certainly was why he was unanimously sought after, because he did not want power. He obviously had demonstrated leadership skills and abilities, but power was not what was in his first and foremost in his mind.
So he really embodied that American philosophy. He was really the personal embodiment of the philosophy that I am not the sovereign over the people. The people are sovereign over me.
He served, which brings to mind something else. Are we running short?
We got about 2 minutes.
2 minutes. I'm going to finish up with a bit of a tribute, a bit of a thank you, because just recently, a fellow that I worked on his congressional campaign and helped him become a congressman, Kurt Clausen in Southwest Florida. After 3 years in Congress, is just announced recently that he is not running for re-election because he believes that citizens should come and serve and go out. And Congressman Clausen is kind of the embodiment of the tradition of George Washington, and he is just recently announced, and I best wishes to Kurt and his family, and hopefully more people will somewhere in the future follow his lead.
That's very cool. I mean, that's a real relic of times past when taking public office was a demotion, and becoming a citizen again was a promotion. You know.
Exactly. And interestingly enough, Kurt won his re-election. He won a special election, then he won re-election. His re-election was at 65%. So it's not like he had any issues of being re-elected to Congress. But
Kurt Clausen is his name?
Kurt Clausen is his name.
Oh, Kurt Clausen for president, I say. Very good.
So we've only got through George. Next time we'll talk about Madison, Franklin, and Jefferson.
All right. Thank you again, David. For part 2, Will Ricciardella from Unbiased America. Please buy David Shestokas' book. Again, it's perfect for high school students, college students, adults that just want to learn about the Constitution. If you're thinking of a graduation gift, you couldn't get a better graduation gift. And if you have kids in college, I implore you, please buy this book and give it to them. They are being fed a ton of progressive crap from their teachers, a lot of myths about the Constitution. Give them this book. You will not regret it. Please tune in next time for part 3 of our series of constitutional soundbites with David Shestokas. Follow him at Shestokas on Twitter, which is at SHESTOKAS. And you can find him also, David J. Shestokas, on Facebook, and you can follow his page there. He's always posting a bunch of excellent articles on the Constitution and other things that are pertinent to today's society. Thanks again, and watch us next time. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Will.